I have always been a man driven by passion, not only in my lifestyle but also in my perception of others, particularly men. There is an undeniable allure in strength and confidence that captivates me. I admire a man with broad shoulders, robust arms, and a chest that seems capable of providing protection from the world. Furthermore, I cannot overlook the appeal of a well-defined backside, it simply ignites my desire. However, beyond these physical attributes, I am fundamentally someone who cherishes love. I find joy in closeness, in the act of touching and holding, and in the understanding that someone perceives me as I perceive them. This has always been my essence, though it is not something I feel compelled to share with everyone. When I relocated to New York this past summer, I chose not to disclose my sexual orientation to my new roommate, Mauricio. This decision was not born from a desire to conceal my identity, but rather from a belief that it was not particularly relevant. We had connected online, both seeking accommodation, two black men, newcomers to the city, navigating our respective journeys. Mauricio was transitioning from Miami, while I was arriving from a small, obscure town. We agreed to share the rent for a modest apartment in Brooklyn, and that was the extent of our arrangement. I vividly recall the first time I encountered him in person. After hauling my duffel bag up 3 flights of stairs, drenched in sweat, I opened the door to find Mauricio standing there. I had thought he was attractive from his online photos, but in reality, he resembled a sculpted figure. His skin was dark, smooth, and radiant, as if he had never skipped a day of skincare. His chest was impressive, his arms appeared capable of lifting heavy weights, and his legs, were strong and powerful, leading to a backside that was exceptionally appealing. I maintained my composure, offering a nod and a handshake, the customary greeting. "Franklin, good to meet you," I said. "Likewise," he replied, flashing a charming smile. His voice was deep, smooth, and exuded confidence, complemented by a pleasant scent reminiscent of citrus and spice. I felt a spark of attraction, but I suppressed it. There was no need to complicate our new living situation. We quickly adapted to our surroundings in the small apartment, which featured a single living room. The bathroom was small, and the kitchen was barely spacious enough for 2. Our rooms were adjacent, separated only by a thin wall. It did not take long for us to establish a routine. Both of us would rise early, hit the gym, and return home late, exhausted yet still managing to find time to relax. However, I began to notice subtle changes. Initially, it was minor details, the way he glanced at me as I walked by, the way his gaze lingered a moment too long when I stretched after a workout, and how he seemed to seek opportunities to be near me when I was shirtless, which was frequent due to the oppressive heat in the apartment that made comfort a priority. Then one evening, a shift occurred. It was late, and I had just emerged from the shower, a towel wrapped low around my waist, water still glistening on my skin. After a long day, all I desired was to lie down, let the silence envelop me, and forget my worries. I collapsed onto my bed, phone in hand, my thoughts wandering. That was when I heard it, a soft, tentative knock. I sat up, slightly puzzled. The door opened, revealing Mauricio. His eyes briefly scanned me before locking onto mine. "Hey," he said, his voice unusually low. "Do you mind if I come in?" There was something in his tone that stirred something within me, a weight, a hesitation that had not been present before. "Sure," I replied, and he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His demeanor was tense, hands flexing at his sides as if he were grappling with something internally. I could see the way his gaze flickered downward before he compelled himself to meet my eyes again. I remained silent, observing him. Then I noticed it, his eyes dropped for just a fleeting moment, enough to reveal that he was looking at me, at the towel, and everything concealed beneath it. In that instant, a slow, knowing smile crept onto my lips. I did not move or speak, I simply waited, watching him. Mauricio's breath hitched slightly, his chest rising and falling a bit too rapidly. His hand twitched at his side, as if he yearned to reach out but hesitated, uncertain of the appropriateness of the gesture. The atmosphere in the room thickened with an unspoken tension. I could have tightened the towel around me, made a light-hearted comment, or dismissed the moment as inconsequential, but I chose not to. Instead, I allowed the fabric to slip just a bit lower, enough to eliminate any ambiguity regarding the connection between us. The air became still, and Mauricio's sharp intake of breath was accompanied by a slight widening of his eyes before he regained his composure. For a prolonged moment, he remained motionless, not even blinking, until he finally stepped closer. The warmth radiating from his skin was now tangible, the distance between us diminishing gradually. His breathing deepened, more intentional, as if he were grappling with an internal struggle. He remained silent, yet his eyes conveyed the hesitation and conflict he felt, the weight of the moment pressing heavily upon him. I chose to remain still, allowing him to make the decision. Eventually, he did, his hand lifted, hovering just above my abdomen, the warmth of his palm tantalizingly close to my skin but not yet making contact. My heart raced, yet I remained composed, observing him. When his fingertips finally brushed against my skin, it felt like a spark igniting dry wood. Mauricio exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening, his fingers barely resting against me as if he awaited a signal to retreat. However, I did not withdraw. Instead, I reached up, my hand finding the back of his neck, my fingers intertwining with the short curls there. His skin was warm and tense, as if he had been suppressing something for far too long. I drew him closer, and that simple action shattered the hesitation. Suddenly, he was no longer holding back. Mauricio kissed me fiercely, as if a dam had burst, releasing all the tension, the stolen glances, and the moments we had both overlooked. His hands found their place on me, one gripping my waist, the other gliding over my back, pulling me into him. I could feel everything, his strength, his warmth, and the undeniable connection that enveloped us. The way his fingers pressed into my skin suggested a fear of my potential disappearance. I responded to his kiss with greater intensity, allowing my hands to explore the contours of his body, tracing the definition of his muscles and feeling the warmth of his skin. This man was a vision, and in that moment, he belonged to me. For an extended period, we remained entwined, the heat emanating between us palpable. Eventually, Mauricio withdrew, panting, his forehead resting against mine. "I don't typically engage in this," he confessed, his voice gravelly and low. I raised an eyebrow, teasingly questioning his sincerity. He chuckled softly, yet I detected a flicker of inner turmoil in his gaze. I refrained from pressing him for answers, choosing instead to observe as he navigated his thoughts. Ultimately, he dismissed his doubts and kissed me once more, this time without any reservations. That night was extraordinary, charged with an energy that felt akin to an impending storm, wild and untamed. When dawn broke and the first light filtered through the curtains, I turned to find him still beside me, and I realized with certainty that this was not a fleeting encounter. We did not discuss the events of that morning. Instead, we exchanged languid smiles, took turns in the shower, and proceeded with our day as if nothing had shifted. Yet, everything had changed. It was evident in the way he gazed at me, how he lingered in the kitchen while I brewed coffee, and the gentle brush of his fingers against mine as he handed me a mug. That evening, our connection deepened once more, surpassing the previous night's intensity. The tension had dissipated, and the barriers had fallen. We were no longer pretending. Our desire for one another was undeniable, and we had ceased to resist it. The nights began to blend together, each evening filled with shared glances and accidental touches that evolved into something more profound. Some nights were slow and playful, filled with laughter and whispered secrets, while others were frantic, as if we were desperate to consume one another. Yet, it was never merely physical. There was an underlying depth to our connection that I could perceive in the way he looked at me. He glanced at me when he believed I was distracted, and the manner in which he crafted reasons to be near me, to touch me, suggested that he wanted to keep me close. Mauricio was not merely seeking a casual encounter, nor was I, however. Neither of us was prepared to vocalize that sentiment just yet. Days morphed into weeks, and the summer in New York seemed to blaze hotter than usual. Perhaps it was simply the city, teeming with people, subway stations resembling saunas, heat rising from the asphalt, or perhaps it was just the two of us, Mauricio and I, ensnared in our own little universe, feigning that this was merely a casual arrangement when it was anything but. It was no longer confined to the nights, it extended to the mornings, waking up to find him still beside me, his arm draped over me as if he had forgotten we were not meant to be this intimate. It was the way he would pilfer my protein shakes from the refrigerator, grinning as if he knew I would allow it. It was the way he lingered in doorways, stretching after a workout, observing me as if he were reminiscing about the previous night. It was everything, yet we still refrained from discussing it, at least not directly. Instead, we allowed it to unfold repeatedly. One evening, the atmosphere shifted. We had just returned from a late gym session, both of us sweaty and our muscles taut, the tension between us more palpable than ever. I had removed my shirt the moment we entered the apartment, and when I turned around, there he stood in the center of the room, gazing at me as if he had something significant to convey. I smirked and asked, "What?" Mauricio hesitated, running a hand over his jaw and exhaling as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, he asked, "This isn't just a hookup, is it?" His voice was low and cautious, the question hanging between us like a charged wire. I could have dismissed it, made a joke, or offered a light-hearted response, but I refrained because I understood the reality, and so did he. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth emanating from his skin, my fingers gliding over his forearm and up to his shoulder, sensing the tension in his muscles beneath my touch. "No," I replied, "it's not." Maisha swallowed hard, then kissed me, but this time it felt different. The kiss was slower and deeper, as if he were conveying emotions he could not articulate. When we fell into bed together, it transcended mere physical attraction, it was about us, something genuine that we could no longer overlook. By the time September arrived, I realized I was not merely cohabiting with Mauricio, I was falling for him. It was in the way he moved, the way he laughed, and how he drew me closer in the middle of the night, as if the thought of me being even slightly distant was unbearable. This was real, and it was steadfast. It was no longer just the nights, it encompassed the mornings and afternoons as well. We navigated around each other like two celestial bodies bound by the same gravitational pull, unable to drift apart even if we wished to. The unspoken tension that once lingered had transformed into a palpable undercurrent, something we both accepted without resistance. We had entered into something profound, something authentic, and although we had never explicitly defined our relationship, one truth was clear: I did not want to spend a single day without him. I came to this realization one evening in early October, when the summer warmth had finally dissipated, allowing the cool air to seep through the cracks of our small apartment windows. Mauricio returned from a late shift, his gym bag slung over his shoulder and his hoodie damp with sweat. I was already in bed, scrolling through my phone, adhering to our new routine. I never fell asleep before he returned, and he never went to bed without first coming to me. He dropped his bag by the door, removed his hoodie, and stretched his arms overhead. His physique was a testament to hard work, muscular and defined, a sculpted masterpiece of dedication. When his eyes met mine in the soft light, I noticed a flicker in his expression, something deeper than mere desire, igniting a quickening of my pulse. He silently traversed the room, ascended onto the bed, and positioned himself above me, his hands resting on either side of my head. The warmth of his breath brushed against my lips, while the rhythm of his heartbeat resonated steadily against my chest. "I missed you today," he murmured, his voice low and rough around the edges. Although it was a simple statement, its significance settled deeply within me. I reached up, tracing my fingers along his jawline, sensing the tension that lay beneath the surface, the unspoken thoughts lingering in the air. "I'm right here." His lips met mine in a slow, lingering kiss, one that held the promise of something deeper, something neither of us had dared to articulate. This connection transcended mere physical attraction, it was about belonging, about discovering something within each other that we had not realized we were missing. That night, as he drew me close and whispered my name as if it were sacred, I recognized my love for this man. As the season changed, the leaves transformed into shades of gold, then crisp brown, eventually vanishing beneath the first snowfall of the year. The city underwent a metamorphosis, the air grew colder, and the nights extended. Yet, within our apartment, within our intimate world, the flames of passion only intensified. We ceased to pretend. Mauricio no longer hesitated to reach for me in the morning, nor did he second-guess the way his fingers would graze my skin for the sake of connection. He no longer lingered in doorways, uncertain, nor did he observe me in quiet contemplation, as if grappling with his feelings. He had come to understand, and he was no longer fleeing from it. One evening, after we had dined out, our first genuine date, though neither of us labeled it as such, he pulled me into his embrace on our way home, right there on the street, exposed to the gaze of passers-by. The city lights shimmered in his dark eyes, and the intensity of his gaze caused my heart to race. "This is real, isn't it?" he inquired, his fingers firmly gripping my waist, his body pressed closely against mine, the cold air doing little to diminish the warmth between us. I smiled. I tilted my head to observe him, committing to memory the contours of his face and the subtle vulnerability that lay beneath his apparent strength. Yes, I acknowledged it, This was the truth, and there was no room for doubt or hesitation any longer. This was not a fleeting arrangement, we were no longer merely two individuals sharing an apartment. We had become everything to one another, a bond that had formed since that very first night. Now, months later, as I reflect on those moments, a smile inevitably crosses my face. We began as roommates, just two men seeking shelter in a city that seemed indifferent to our existence. Yet, somewhere along the line, within the confines of that small apartment, amidst late-night whispers and stolen glances, and in the way he regarded me as if I were the sole source of clarity in his life, we evolved into something deeper, something genuine. The intensity of our connection still burns as brightly as it did on that initial summer night, and I am determined that this flame will never extinguish.